I am dying now, and with my death, a secret will either be buried or set free. I have not decided which yet. My name is Duncan MacLeod, and I am 87 years old. I have lived my entire life within sight of Loch Ness, in a stone cottage that my grandfather built with his own hands in 1891. The walls are thick, the windows small, and the wind from the loch finds every crack come winter. I have been alone here for 43 years. My wife left in 1981, taking our daughter with her. She said I had become a stranger, that I cared more for the water than for my own family. She was right, though not in the way she imagined. The doctors tell me I have perhaps 3 months. Cancer, they say, though the specific type hardly matters at my age. The pain is manageable with pills, but the loneliness, that has been unbearable for decades. Yet I chose it. Every single day, I chose it. This is not a story I ever intended to tell. For 62 years, I have kept my silence as faithfully as a priest keeps the confessional seal. I have watched documentary crews come and go. I have read the books, seen the photographs, most of them hoaxes, some of them genuine mistakes, all of them missing the truth entirely. I have sat in the doors in and listened to tourists laugh about the monster, about the silly Scots who believe in fairy tales to fleece visitors of their money. I have smiled and nodded and ordered another whiskey, and I have said nothing. But silence has a weight. It accumulates like snow on a roof, year after year, until you wonder if the beams will hold. I feel that weight now, pressing against my chest worse than the tumor. Perhaps that is why I am finally speaking. Or perhaps it is simply that the dead cannot be held accountable, and I am nearly dead enough to risk it. Before I continue, I need to ask something of you, whoever you are, wherever you are hearing this. If this story moves you, if it makes you wonder, if it makes you feel anything at all, please share it. Subscribe to this channel. Let others hear what I have to say before my voice is silenced forever. This is my last testimony, and I need to know it won't disappear with me into the dark waters of the loch. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. The story begins in March of 1962. I was 25 years old, newly married to Moira, and working my father's fishing boat on the loch. It was not romantic work, despite what the tourists might imagine. My hands were permanently scarred from hooks and nets, my back ached from hauling traps, and the smell of fish never quite left my clothes no matter how Moira scrubbed them. But it was honest work, and the loch provided. My father had fished these waters for 50 years before me. He knew every inlet, every shelf, every place where the char and pike congregated. He had taught me to read the water like a book, where the wind would push the fish, how the temperature changed with depth, which shadows meant rocks and which meant something moving beneath. He was a practical man, my father. He believed in what he could touch and measure. He had no patience for the Nessie hunters who began appearing after the war, with their cameras and their sonar equipment and their absolute certainty that something impossible lived in our loch. Tourists and fools, he would say, mending nets in the evening. The loch is deep and cold and dark, aye, but it's just water, Duncan. Just water and fish and old logs that look strange in the mist. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? I had been on the loch nearly every day of my life. I had seen the tricks the light could play, how a wave could look like a hump, how a diving bird could create a wake that seemed enormous. I had seen nothing that couldn't be explained. Until that morning in March. The dawn came late that time of year, the sun struggling to burn through the perpetual grey that hangs over the highlands in winter. I remember the cold. It was the kind that gets into your bones and stays there, making your joints ache and your fingers clumsy. The water was calm, almost glassy, with just a light mist hovering over the surface. Perfect conditions for fishing, my father would have said. I had taken the boat out alone. Moira was 3 months pregnant with our daughter, sick every morning, and I wanted to let her sleep. My father had died the previous autumn, suddenly, while hauling in nets. One moment he was working, grunting with effort, and the next he was on the deck, eyes open but seeing nothing. The doctor said his heart simply stopped. He was 68 years old. So the boat was mine now. The livelihood was mine. The responsibility was mine. I was determined to prove I could handle it, that I was the fisherman my father had been. I had motored out to the deep section near Urquhart Bay, where the loch drops to nearly 700 feet. The char liked to feed there in the early morning, coming up from the depths to hunt smaller fish in the shallows. I cut the engine and let the boat drift, preparing my lines. That was when I heard it. It was not a sound I can easily describe. Not a splash, not a breath, not a movement of water. It was deeper than that, a vibration that seemed to come from below, felt more than heard. It resonated in my chest, in my teeth, in the wooden hull of the boat. I froze, line in hand, listening. The mist had thickened slightly, reducing visibility to perhaps 50 yards. The water was still calm, but now I noticed ripples forming in a pattern that made no sense, concentric circles expanding from a point about 30 yards off the starboard side. Too large to be a fish. Too regular to be wind. I waited, heart hammering, telling myself it was nothing. A log settling on the bottom. A current from the depths. Anything explainable. Then the water broke. What surfaced was not a head, not initially. It was the back, a curved, dark mass that rose smooth and silent, water streaming off in sheets. It was at least 15 feet long, perhaps more, and perhaps 4 feet wide at its highest point. The skin was not scaled but smooth, dark grey-brown, like whetstone or old leather. It gleamed in the dim morning light. I stood paralyzed in my boat, unable to move, unable to think, unable to do anything but stare. The mass moved forward slowly, creating almost no weight despite its size. It was controlled, deliberate, graceful in a way that no log or trick of light could ever be. And then, perhaps 20 feet ahead of where the back had surfaced, something else broke the water. The neck. Long and serpentine, it rose 6 feet above the surface, tapering to a head that was small relative to the body but still the size of a large dog. The head turned, sweeping slowly from side to side, and I saw the eye. God help me, I saw the eye. It was dark, almost black, and large as my fist. But what froze my blood was not the size but the intelligence in it. This was not the blank, instinctive gaze of a fish or a seal. This was awareness. This was thought. This was something looking at the world and understanding what it saw. The head turned toward me, and the eye fixed on my boat. We stared at each other across the water, man and creature, both frozen, both assessing. I do not know how long that moment lasted. Seconds, perhaps, though it felt like hours. I could see details I wish I couldn't remember, the way the skin had a subtle texture, like fine leather. The way water droplets clung to the neck before sliding down. The way the creature's breathing created tiny ripples around where the neck entered the water. Then, slowly, it began to sink. The neck descended first, lowering back into the water with barely a ripple. The back followed, that great curved mass slipping beneath the surface as smoothly as it had risen. Within seconds, there was nothing, no wake, no disturbance, nothing but the mist and the still water and me standing in my boat, shaking so badly I had to sit down before I fell. I did not go home immediately. I could not. I sat in that boat for 2 hours, maybe more, staring at the water where the creature had been. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I had seen, trying to find an explanation that would let me dismiss it as illusion or mistake. But I couldn't. God knows I tried, but I couldn't. The problem was the details. I knew this loch. I knew how light played on water, how mist could deceive, how imagination could fill in gaps. What I had seen was none of those things. It had been solid, three-dimensional, moving through space with clear physicality. The water displacement had been real. The ripples had been real. The eye, Christ, the eye had been real. Something lived in this loch. Something large and ancient and intelligent. The impossible was true. Eventually, I started the engine and motored back to shore, my catch forgotten, my lines untouched. The sun was higher now, burning away the mist, and the loch looked normal again, beautiful and calm and empty. But I knew what lay beneath that calm surface. Moira was awake when I got home, worried because I had been gone so long. She took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. "Duncan? What happened? Are you hurt?" I opened my mouth to tell her. The words were right there, pressing against my teeth, demanding to be spoken. But something stopped me. Some instinct deeper than thought, some animal awareness that speaking would change everything irrevocably. "I'm fine," I heard myself say. "Just felt poorly. Came back early." She didn't believe me. I could see it in her eyes. But she was practical, my Moira, and pregnant, and she had enough to worry about without me adding to it. So she made me tea and fed me breakfast and didn't press the issue. But I had lied to my wife. For the first time in our marriage, I had looked her in the eye and lied. That sin, because that is what it felt like, a sin, was the first stone in the wall I would spend the next 60 years building between myself and everyone I loved. For the next 3 days, I did not go out on the loch. I told Moira I was repairing nets, organizing the shed, doing maintenance on the boat. In truth, I was trying to decide what to do with what I knew. The rational choice was obvious: tell someone. Tell the authorities, tell the researchers, tell the world. This was the greatest zoological discovery of the century, perhaps in all of history. A living plesiosaur, or something like it, surviving in a Scottish loch. The scientific implications were staggering. My name would be remembered forever. I would never have to fish again, the fame alone would be enough to live on. But every time I imagined doing that, I felt a cold dread in my gut. I thought about the eye. I thought about that moment of recognition, of mutual awareness. I thought about what would happen if the world knew for certain that the creature existed. The loch would become a circus. Boats would swarm the water day and night. Sonar equipment, nets, cameras, submarines, every piece of modern technology would be deployed to find it, capture it, study it. The military would get involved, I had no doubt of that. They would want to know if it was dangerous, if there were more of them, if they could be controlled or weaponized or contained. The creature would have no peace, no sanctuary. Its existence would become a spectacle, and then an experiment, and then, if they caught it, a tragedy. I realized, sitting in my shed with unrepaired nets piled around me, that I had been given a choice. The creature had surfaced in view of my boat, had looked at me with that knowing eye, and had then disappeared without attacking, without fleeing in panic, without creating the kind of disturbance that would have drawn attention from shore. It had shown itself and then hidden again, as if testing me. The thought was absurd. I knew that. But I couldn't shake it. On the fourth day, I went back out on the water. I went to the same spot where I had seen it, cut the engine, and waited. I didn't fish. I just waited, sitting in the boat, watching the water. Hours passed. Nothing happened. The loch remained still and empty. But as the sun began to set, painting the water orange and gold, I spoke aloud. "I won't tell," I said to the empty air, feeling foolish even as I did it. "I don't know if you can understand me. I don't know if you're even here. But if you are, I won't tell. You're safe. I promise." The words hung in the air for a moment, then vanished into the wind. Nothing responded. The water remained calm. I started the engine and went home. That night, I slept better than I had in days. The years that followed established the pattern of my life, a pattern I would maintain with religious devotion until this very day. I became a student of the loch in ways my father never had been. Not just of the fish and the currents, but of the creature itself. I began to understand its rhythms, its territories, its behavior. This education came slowly, painfully, through observation and inference and hundreds of hours spent on the water in silence. I learned that it surfaced most often in the early morning or late evening, when the light was dim and the tourist boats were absent. I learned that it preferred the deeper sections, Urquhart Bay, the area near Foyers, the stretch between Invermariston and Fort Augustus where the loch plunges to its greatest depths. I learned that it was cautious, intelligent, and perhaps aware of the human activity above. I saw it perhaps 30 times in those first 5 years. Never for long, a glimpse of the back, a brief surfacing of the neck, once a disturbance in the water that could only have been the tail. Each sighting reinforced what I had known from that first morning. This was a living creature, as real as the pike in my nets or the eagles above the hills. But I also learned something more troubling. I was not the only one who fished these waters. There were others, commercial fishermen, sport anglers, the occasional researcher. And as the 1960s progressed, the Nessie phenomenon grew from local legend to international obsession. The first serious expeditions began arriving with equipment far more sophisticated than anything my father could have imagined. In 1962, a Cambridge team brought sonar equipment. In 1963, the Loch Ness Phenomena Investigation Bureau was established, setting up camera stations around the loch. By 1964, there were underwater cameras, hydrophones, and regular boat patrols scanning the water day and night. I watched all of this with growing anxiety. Every new piece of technology, every new expedition, was a threat to the promise I had made. I began to realize that my silence alone was not enough. I needed to actively protect the creature from discovery. This meant becoming a liar on a scale I had never imagined. When researchers asked if I had seen anything unusual, I shook my head and smiled. Just logs and waves, like always. The old monster stories are good for tourism, nothing more. When tourists hired me to take them out on the water, hoping for a sighting, I deliberately steered away from the areas where I knew the creature favored. I would point to distant ripples and say, "Might be something there," knowing full well it was just wind or a diving bird. When sonar teams reported mysterious contacts in the deep water, I would nod knowingly and mention old shipwrecks or rock formations that didn't exist, sending them searching in the wrong places. I became an expert in misdirection, in gentle discouragement, in the subtle art of making people look anywhere but where they should. And I hated myself for it. Every lie felt like a betrayal, not of the truth, but of something deeper. Of my nature as an honest man. Of the values my father had taught me. But the alternative was worse. The alternative was betraying the creature itself. Moira noticed the change in me. How could she not? The man she had married was honest and straightforward, uncomfortable with even small deceptions. Now I lied reflexively, constantly, about things large and small. I lied about where I had been fishing. I lied about what I had seen. I lied about why I sometimes came home late, my catch mysteriously light despite hours on the water. The truth was that I had begun to guard the creature actively. If I saw boats approaching an area where I suspected it might be, I would motor over and engage the occupants in conversation, distracting them, giving it time to slip away into deeper water. If I heard of a new expedition planning to use nets or traps in certain areas, I would quietly sabotage their efforts, cutting anchor lines in the night, reporting false sightings elsewhere, once even filing a complaint about unauthorized commercial fishing that delayed their permits for months. I became the creature's invisible guardian, its secret protector. And in doing so, I became a stranger to my own wife. Our daughter, Fiona, was born in September of 1962. She was perfect, small and red-faced and howling with indignation at the cold Highland air. Moira was exhausted but radiant, and I held my daughter and felt love so intense it was almost painful. But even in that moment, I felt the shadow of my secret. This child would grow up with a father who was only half present, who spent more time thinking about the creature in the loch than about his own family. Already, I knew it. Already, I could feel the distance growing. I told myself it was necessary. I told myself that protecting the creature was important, perhaps the most important thing I would ever do. I told myself that my family would understand, someday, if they ever knew the truth. But they never would know the truth. That was part of the protection too. The fewer people who knew, the safer the creature would be. Even Moira. Even my own daughter. Especially them. The first real crisis came in the summer of 1969. A team from the Academy of Applied Science in Massachusetts arrived with new underwater photography equipment and a plan to conduct the most comprehensive search of the loch ever attempted. They had funding, expertise, and most dangerously, they had patience. They intended to stay for months, scanning every inch of the deep water systematically. I was terrified. I attended their public briefing at the village hall, listening as they outlined their methodology. They would use strobe cameras triggered by sonar contacts, positioned at various depths throughout the loch's known deep zones. The system would operate 24 hours a day, photographing anything that moved through the water. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay next to Moira, listening to her breathe, and calculated probabilities in my head. The loch was vast, over 23 miles long, more than a mile wide in places, with water so dark and murky that visibility was measured in feet rather than yards. The chances of any single camera capturing the creature were relatively small. But relatively small was not zero. And if they stayed for months, taking thousands of photographs, eventually, the odds would favor discovery. I had to do something. What I did, I am not proud of. But I would do it again, without hesitation. I volunteered to help the expedition. I offered my boat, my knowledge of the loch, my expertise as a local fisherman. They were delighted. Local cooperation always made these projects easier. And it gave me access to their plans, their schedules, their equipment. Over the next 3 months, I sabotaged that expedition in small, untraceable ways. A camera cable would develop a mysterious short circuit. A sonar unit would malfunction after I accidentally knocked it during rough water. Film would be ruined by what appeared to be light leaks in the storage containers. Batteries would drain faster than expected. Nothing obvious. Nothing that would point to deliberate interference. Just the normal frustrations of working with sensitive equipment in harsh conditions. And when they did get promising sonar contacts, which happened twice, I made sure I was present, and I made sure we investigated the wrong locations. The currents can confuse the readings, I would say, pointing to an area 50 yards from where the contact had actually occurred. Best to search in a wider pattern. They left in October, frustrated but not suspicious. They had some interesting sonar data but no photographs, no proof, nothing definitive. In their final report, they concluded that while they couldn't rule out the existence of a large unidentified creature, they had failed to obtain evidence of one. I read that report in the village library and felt relief so intense I had to sit down. The creature was safe. My secret was safe. But my marriage was dying. Moira had watched me that summer, watched me spend every day with the researchers, come home exhausted and distracted, show more enthusiasm for helping tourists than I ever showed for my own family. From her perspective, I had abandoned her and Fiona for the very thing I claimed to disdain, the foolish hunt for a monster that didn't exist. If you're finding this story compelling, if you're wondering what happened next, please take a moment to subscribe to this channel and share this video. These confessions deserve to be heard, and your support ensures they reach those who need to hear them. Now, let me tell you about the night everything changed. We argued one night in October, after Fiona was asleep. Not shouting, Moira never shouted, but the quiet, devastating kind of argument where every word lands like a stone. "You've changed," she said. "You're not the man I married." "I'm trying to provide for us," I replied. "The fishing isn't what it used to be. I need to supplement our income. By helping people search for something you've always said was nonsense? By spending every waking hour on that damned loch. It's good money, Moira." "It's not about money." Her voice cracked slightly. "You're never here, Duncan. Even when you're sitting right next to me, you're not here. Your mind is always somewhere else. Out on the water. I feel like I'm living with a ghost." I wanted to tell her everything in that moment. I wanted to explain why I was distant, why I seemed obsessed, why the loch consumed my thoughts. I wanted her to understand that I wasn't chasing fame or money or childish adventure. I was protecting something ancient and irreplaceable, something that existed on the knife's edge between survival and extinction. But I couldn't. Because telling her would make her complicit. It would burden her with the same terrible knowledge that was slowly crushing me. And worse, it would make the secret less secure. Secrets grow more fragile with every person who shares them. So I said nothing. I let her believe I had become obsessed with tourist nonsense. I let her believe I cared more for strangers and their foolish quests than for my own family. I let her believe the lie, because the truth was worse. She cried that night. I heard her in the bathroom, trying to muffle the sound. And I sat in our living room, staring at the dark window that looked out over the loch, and I knew I had made a choice that couldn't be unmade. The creature or my family. The secret or my marriage. The promise or everything else. I had chosen the promise. And I would keep choosing it, again and again, for the next 43 years. The 1970s brought more expeditions, more technology, more close calls. Each one required vigilance, creativity, and an increasing web of lies to maintain. In 1972, Robert Rines and his team from the Academy of Applied Science returned with improved underwater cameras. They captured a series of photographs, blurry, controversial, but suggestive of something large and animate in the deep water. Those photographs would later be analyzed, enhanced, debated. They showed what might have been a flipper, a body, a long neck. I knew, the moment I saw them, that they were genuine. The angle was wrong, the lighting poor, the creature was too deep and the water too murky for clarity, but it was there. The world had come closer to proof than ever before. And yet, the images were ambiguous enough to remain controversial. Believers saw confirmation. Skeptics saw shadows and debris. The scientific community remained divided. The creature's existence stayed in the realm of the possible but unproven. I was simultaneously relieved and terrified. Relieved because the proof wasn't definitive enough to trigger the kind of intensive investigation I feared. Terrified because it showed how vulnerable the creature had become, how even with all my efforts, discovery remained possible. I realized I needed to do more than just misdirect and sabotage. I needed to actively study the creature, to understand its behavior well enough to predict when it might be vulnerable and take preemptive action. This meant spending even more time on the water. I would go out at dawn and not return until dusk, fishing enough to maintain appearances but mostly watching, waiting, listening. I began to recognize patterns I had missed before. The creature seemed to feed primarily at night, probably on the large char and salmon that inhabited the deeper waters. During the day, especially when boat traffic was heavy, it stayed deep, far below the range of most cameras or sonar units designed to scan the middle depths where most large fish swam. It had specific routes it favored, channels through the underwater landscape where the depth gave it cover but the topology provided easy navigation. I began to map these routes in my head, memorizing the geography of the loch's bottom as thoroughly as I knew its surface. And I began to see evidence that I was not the creature's only guardian. There were others who fished these waters regularly, other locals who had lived here for generations. I noticed that certain fishermen seemed to avoid specific areas at specific times, even when the fishing would have been good there. I noticed meaningful looks exchanged when tourists asked certain questions. I noticed a subtle network of protection that had existed long before I stumbled into it. We never spoke of it directly. That would have violated the unspoken rules. But I understood that I had inherited more than just my father's boat and his fishing grounds. I had inherited a responsibility that stretched back generations, a duty passed from father to son in silence and solitude. My father had known. Of course he had known. All those times he had dismissed the monster stories, mocked the tourists, laughed at the investigators, he had been protecting it too. Teaching me, in his way, to do the same. I wished desperately that he was still alive so I could ask him how he had managed it. How he had balanced the burden of the secret with the demands of family and normal life. How he had stayed sane carrying knowledge that couldn't be shared. But he was gone, and I was alone with questions that had no answers. Fiona grew up barely knowing me. I was present physically, I lived in the house, I ate dinner with them, I attended school events when Moira insisted, but I was absent in every way that mattered. My mind was always on the loch, always calculating risks and probabilities and potential threats. When Fiona was 8, she asked me why I spent so much time on the water. "It's my job, sweetheart," I told her. "I'm a fisherman." That's what I do. But you don't seem happy, she said, with the devastating honesty of children. Mommy says you used to smile more. I didn't know how to respond to that. What could I say? That I had sacrificed my happiness, my marriage, my relationship with her, all to protect something she couldn't know existed? That seemed monstrous when I tried to put it into words. So I just hugged her and said, life is complicated sometimes, love. You'll understand when you're older. But she never would understand. How could she? I was building a wall between us brick by brick, and each brick was a lie or an evasion or a moment of absence. By the time she was a teenager, that wall was too high to scale. She left for university in Edinburgh in 1980 and rarely came back. I couldn't blame her. What was there to come back to? A father who was a stranger, a mother who was quietly bitter, a cottage that felt less like a home and more like a prison. Moira left the following year. She didn't divorce me, we were both too Catholic for that, or too stubborn, or too tired to bother with the formalities. She simply moved to Inverness to be closer to her sister and left me alone in the cottage. I can't watch you disappear anymore, Duncan, she said as she packed. You're not even here. You haven't been here for years. I don't know where you go, inside your head, but it's somewhere I can't follow. So I'm done trying. I helped her carry boxes to her car. I kissed her cheek. I told her I was sorry, and I meant it. But I didn't ask her to stay. What would have been the point? I had made my choice long ago. That night, I sat alone in the cottage and listened to the wind from the lock rattle the windows. The silence was absolute. No wife moving about in the kitchen. No daughter laughing at the television. Just me and the old stones and the weight of the secret. I was 44 years old, and I had successfully driven away everyone I loved to protect something most people didn't believe existed. And I would do it all again, without hesitation. Because 3 weeks after Moira left, I went out on the water in the early morning and saw the creature surface closer than it ever had before. Close enough to see details I had never noticed, the texture of the skin, the way the neck moved, the intelligence in that dark eye. It looked at me for a long moment, that ancient gaze meeting mine across the water. And I swear, though I know how mad this sounds, I swear it nodded. Just a slight dip of the head, there and gone. Recognition. Acknowledgement. Perhaps even gratitude. Then it slipped beneath the water and vanished, leaving only ripples that spread and faded and finally smoothed into nothing. I sat in my boat and wept. For my lost family. For my wasted life. For the beauty and tragedy of what I protected. For the loneliness that stretched ahead of me like the dark water of the loch. And then I wiped my eyes, started the engine, and went back to shore. I had work to do. The creature needed protection. That was all that mattered. That was all that had ever mattered. The 1980s blurred together into a monotonous routine of surveillance and deception. I was no longer living, I was existing, functioning, maintaining. Each day was the same: rise before dawn, make tea, go to the loch, watch, wait, fish enough to sell, return at dusk, eat alone, sleep poorly, repeat. The cottage fell into disrepair around me. Roof tiles cracked and went unmended. Paint peeled from the window frames. The garden Moira had lovingly tended became overgrown with weeds and wild grass. I told myself I would fix these things eventually, but I never did. They seemed trivial compared to my real work. The expeditions continued, though less frequently than in the hectic years of the 60s and 70s. Technology improved, better sonar, better cameras, better underwater vehicles. Each advancement made me anxious, kept me awake at night calculating the odds of discovery. In 1987, a particularly ambitious project called Operation Deepscan brought 24 boats equipped with sonar to sweep the entire loch simultaneously. It was the most comprehensive search ever attempted, and I was certain it would find something conclusive. I couldn't sabotage 24 boats. I couldn't mislead that many operators. All I could do was watch and pray that the creature stayed deep, stayed still, stayed invisible. The sweep detected 3 unexplained sonar contacts of significant size. The operators were excited, certain they had found evidence. But the contacts were brief, ambiguous, and impossible to verify. By the time boats reached the locations, there was nothing there. The creature had survived again, more through luck than through any protection I could offer. That realization haunted me. I was becoming obsolete. The technology was outpacing my ability to interfere with it. Eventually, maybe not today, maybe not this year, but eventually, someone would get proof that couldn't be dismissed or debated. I began to understand that I wasn't really protecting the creature from discovery. I was only delaying it. Buying time. But time for what? The creature wasn't going anywhere. The loch wasn't going anywhere. The inevitable felt inevitable. This thought brought a strange kind of despair. If my life's work was ultimately futile, then what had I sacrificed everything for? What had been the point of losing my family, my friends, my entire normal life, if the end result would be the same regardless of my efforts? The old methods, lying, misdirecting, sabotaging equipment, wouldn't work against laboratory science performed hundreds of miles away from the loch itself. The creature's anonymity had survived into the modern age through sheer luck and the vastness of its habitat. But that luck was running out. Science was patient, methodical, and relentless. Eventually, it would find what it was looking for. Unless there was nothing left to find. That thought occurred to me one morning in 1998 as I sat in my boat watching the mist burn off the water. I hadn't seen the creature in over 2 years. The last sighting had been brief, just a disturbance in the water that could have been the tail, or could have been nothing. Before that, another year had passed without any sign. Was it dead? Had it died while I was watching, protecting an empty grave without knowing it? The thought hollowed me out. All those years, all those sacrifices, all that loneliness, and perhaps the creature had already passed beyond the need for my protection. Perhaps I had been guarding a ghost, a memory, a hope that had died long before I was ready to acknowledge it. Or perhaps it was simply being more cautious. Perhaps it had learned, over the decades, that the surface was dangerous, that remaining hidden was the only way to survive. Perhaps my protection had taught it that, had allowed it to live long enough to become wise in its wariness. I wanted to believe that. I needed to believe that. Because if the creature was gone, then everything I had done was for nothing. My life was for nothing. So I chose to believe it was still there, somewhere in the depths, ancient and patient and waiting for the world to forget about it again. The turn of the millennium felt apocalyptic to me, though not in the way the doomsayers had predicted. The world didn't end with computer failures or power grid collapses. It ended more quietly than that, with the realization that I had become completely irrelevant. I was 63 years old. My hands were arthritic, making it difficult to handle fishing gear. My eyes were failing, requiring thick glasses to see the water clearly. My hearing was going, making it hard to detect the subtle sounds that had once alerted me to the creature's presence. I was still going out on the loch every day, still maintaining my vigil, but I was a shadow of the guardian I had once been. Worse, the world had moved on without me. Tourism had changed. The old earnest researchers had largely been replaced by television crews looking for entertainment rather than evidence. The Loch Ness Monster had become a brand, a marketing tool, a joke. Gift shops sold stuffed Nessie toys. Hotels advertised monster views. Even the locals had stopped taking it seriously, playing along with the tourist fantasy while winking at each other about the foolishness of visitors. I watched this transformation with a mixture of relief and grief. Relief because if nobody took the creature seriously, nobody would mount the kind of intensive, well-funded search that might actually find it. Grief because the cheapening of the legend felt like a betrayal of something sacred. But perhaps that was appropriate. Perhaps the creature had always been destined to become mythology, and the only question was whether the myth would be real but hidden or never existed at all. From the creature's perspective, if it still lived, the distinction might not matter. Either way, it would be left alone. Moira died in 2003. Heart attack, sudden and massive. She was 65. Fiona called to tell me, her voice tight with controlled emotion. The funeral is Thursday, she said. In Inverness. Will you come? Of course, I said. Of course I'll be there. But I almost wasn't. The night before the funeral, I sat in my cottage and seriously considered not going. What right did I have to mourn publicly for a woman I had driven away? What right did I have to stand beside my daughter when I had abandoned my role as her father decades ago? In the end, I went. Not because I deserved to be there, but because Moira deserved to be mourned, and my absence would have hurt Fiona more than my presence could. The service was small, quiet, dignified. Moira had made friends in Inverness, had built a life there that didn't include me. People spoke about her kindness, her humor, her work with the church. They painted a picture of a woman I had known once, long ago, before I became the stranger who haunted our cottage by the loch. Fiona stood beside me during the service, separated by inches and by decades of distance. She had grown into a woman who looked remarkably like her mother, the same strong features, the same intelligent eyes, the same set to her jaw that suggested she had learned to carry disappointment without complaint. After the burial, she turned to me. "We need to talk," she said. "Not here. Come to my house tomorrow." I nodded, throat too tight for words. The next day, I drove to her home in Edinburgh, a nice townhouse in a nice neighborhood, the kind of place Moira would have loved. Fiona made tea, served biscuits I didn't eat, and sat across from me in her living room with an expression I couldn't read. "I want to understand," she said finally. "I need to understand. What happened to you, Dad? What happened to us?" I had dreaded this conversation for decades. Now that it was here, I found I had no answers I could give her. I was dedicated to my work, I said weakly. "Your work?" She repeated the words like they were foreign. "Fishing? You destroyed your marriage, abandoned your family, for fishing. It's more complicated than that. Then explain it to me. Help me understand why you were never there. Why you chose the loch over Mum, over me, over everything. What was so important that it was worth losing us?" This confession is coming to its end, but before we reach the final truth, I need to ask you something. If this story has moved you, If it's made you think about secrets and sacrifice and the weight of choices, please share it. Subscribe to this channel. Leave a comment telling me what you think. These may be the last words I ever speak to the world, and I need to know someone is listening. Now, let me tell you what I told my daughter that day. I looked at my daughter, this woman who shed my blood but not my life, and I made a decision. The same decision I had made with Moira all those years ago. I lied. There's nothing to explain, I said. I was selfish. I was obsessed with something meaningless. I wasted my life and I destroyed yours in the process. I'm sorry, Fiona. That's all I can say. I'm sorry. It was the truth, after a fashion. But it wasn't the whole truth. And watching the disappointment settle over my daughter's face, disappointment that I couldn't even give her a better excuse, a more satisfying explanation, I understood that my silence had accomplished exactly what I feared. I had protected the creature, but I had sacrificed my daughter's ability to understand or forgive me in the process. She drove me back to the train station in silence. Before I got out of the car, she spoke once more. I can't forgive you, Dad. Maybe someday, but not now. It hurts too much. But I want you to know, I don't hate you. I'm just sad. Sad for you, sad for Mum, sad for what we could have been. I know, I said. I'm sad too. I didn't see her again after that. We exchanged Christmas cards for a few years, brief and impersonal, then even those stopped. She had her own life, her own family. 2 children I had never met. I was a grandfather and a stranger simultaneously. The years after that conversation were the loneliest of my life. I had always been isolated, but there had been a purpose to it, a nobility even in the sacrifice. Now I was just an old man living alone, watching water that revealed nothing, protecting something that might not even exist anymore. I stopped fishing commercially around 2010. My hands couldn't manage it anymore. I lived on savings and a small pension, and it was enough because I needed so little. Just food, heat, and the ability to take my boat out when the weather allowed. I saw the creature one last time in 2015. Early morning, late autumn, the water cold and dark and still. A brief surfacing, just the back, just a moment, there and gone before I could be certain it was real and not simply what I desperately wanted to see. But I knew. After 53 years of watching, I knew. It was real. It was still there. Still alive, still surviving, still hidden from the world that would never stop looking for it. I went home that day and, for the first time in decades, I felt something like peace. Whatever else I had failed at, I had succeeded in my primary mission. The creature had outlived the 20th century's assault of technology and attention. It had survived into an age where most people no longer seriously believed in its existence. It was as safe as it could ever be. My work was done. The peace lasted 3 years. Then, in the spring of 2018, the diagnosis came. Cancer. Aggressive, inoperable, terminal. They gave me 2 years, maybe 3 if I was lucky and the treatment worked. I declined the treatment. At 81 years old, what was the point? I had no one to live for. No family waiting for me to recover. No projects left unfinished except the one that could never truly be finished. Why spend my final month sick from chemotherapy when I could spend them on the loch, watching? But the diagnosis did force me to confront a question I had been avoiding. What would happen to the creature after I was gone? The other guardians, The unspoken network of locals who helped protect the secret were dying off too. We had all been young men in the 1960s, bound by shared knowledge we never directly acknowledged. Now we were old men, fading away one by one, taking our secrets with us. Who would watch over the creature when we were gone? Who would misdirect and lie and sabotage in its defense? The younger generation didn't have the same relationship with the loch that we had. They had grown up with the internet, with instant information, with a world where secrets seemed impossible to keep. Would they even understand the importance of silence? I lay awake at night thinking about this. Not about my own death, that seemed almost welcome at this point, a relief from the loneliness and the pain and the weight of all those decades. But about what my death would mean for the creature. And then, in December of 2018, the crisis I had always feared finally arrived. A new research team announced plans for a comprehensive environmental DNA study of the loch. They would collect samples from throughout the water column, analyzing them for genetic material from any large organisms living there. The study was well-funded, scientifically rigorous, and designed to finally answer the question, was there something unusual living in Loch Ness or not? I read the announcement online. One of the few concessions to modernity I had made was a basic computer and internet connection, and felt I settle in my stomach. This was it. The thing I had feared for 56 years. If the creature still lived, this study would likely find genetic evidence of it. And once that evidence existed, everything would change. More studies would follow. More intensive searches. Eventually, proof that couldn't be denied. The creature would be discovered. My life's work would be undone. All those sacrifices would be for nothing. I was too old and too sick to sabotage this project. I had no energy for the elaborate deceptions I had once managed with ease. My body was failing me at the moment I needed it most. But there was one thing I could still do. One final protection I could offer. I could tell the truth. Not about the creature itself, that secret I would keep until my last breath. But about me. About my life, my isolation, my obsession. I could create a narrative that would make people less likely to believe any evidence that emerged. I could become the cautionary tale, the example of what happened when you took the Loch Ness Monster too seriously. A sad old man who wasted his life on a fantasy, drove away his family, lived in delusion until the end. If I confessed to my obsession publicly, if I admitted to lying and deceiving for decades, people would dismiss anything associated with me as the ravings of a mentally ill person. Any evidence I had ever seen or reported would be retroactively discredited. I could poison the well, make the truth seem less credible by association with a known fabricator. It was the opposite of everything I had done for 6 decades. Instead of hiding, I would speak publicly. Instead of appearing sane and credible, I would present myself as obsessed and unreliable. Instead of protecting through silence, I would protect through confession. But confession is complicated. To be convincing, it must contain truth. People can sense when someone is performing madness rather than experiencing it. So I would tell the truth about my life, about my isolation, about what I had sacrificed. I would just lie about the reason why. I would say I had become obsessed with proving the creature existed. That I had spent my life searching for evidence I never found. That I had driven away my family in pursuit of a fantasy. That I had lied about sightings, fabricated encounters, become so invested in the legend that I could no longer separate reality from desire. The researchers conducting the DNA study would hear about me, the cautionary tale, the obsessed old man who had dedicated his life to a fantasy and lost everything. And when their study found something unusual, when questions arose about what it might mean, my story would be there, ready-made, to explain it away. Just another Loch Ness obsessive, they would say. Another sad case like that MacLeod fellow. People see what they want to see. It was the perfect final deception. Protect the creature by destroying my own credibility. Save it by damning myself. But there was a problem. A flaw in this plan that I couldn't reconcile. If I confessed to obsession and fabrication, Fiona would hear about it. My daughter, who already thought I had wasted my life on meaningless fishing, would learn that I had actually wasted it on something even more absurd. It would be the final humiliation, the ultimate proof that her father had been not just absent but delusional. I would die knowing that my daughter's last memory of me would be pity mixed with contempt. And I would have no way to explain to her that it wasn't what she thought, that there had been a reason, that the sacrifice had been real and necessary and noble in its way. I sat in my cottage for 3 weeks, turning this dilemma over in my mind. My health was declining rapidly. The doctors had been optimistic when they said 2 years. I could feel death approaching much faster than that. I had months, perhaps. Weeks, possibly. I had to decide. The creature or my daughter? The secret or my legacy? Truth or lie or some impossible combination of both? And I realized that I had been making that same choice, in different forms, for my entire life. And every time, I had chosen the creature. Every single time. Why should my death be any different? And so I am making this recording. This confession that is not quite a confession. This truth that is wrapped in lies that are wrapped in deeper truths. If you are hearing this, then I am dead, or close enough to it. The cancer has progressed beyond the point where I can hold a pen or type on a keyboard. This voice recording is the best I can manage. My daughter's husband helped me set up the equipment before he knew what I intended to use it for. I told him I wanted to record my memories of fishing. He was kind enough not to point out that I had no one to leave such memories to. The DNA study concluded in 2019. They found traces of many things: eels, fish, bacteria, even traces of human DNA from swimmers and boaters. They found no evidence of a plesiosaur or any other large unknown creature. The lead researcher announced that the Loch Ness Monster was most likely a myth, a case of misidentification and wishful thinking. I read that announcement and felt relief. Complicated relief, mixed with uncertainty and doubt, but relief nonetheless. Either the creature was truly gone, its DNA long since degraded beyond detection, or it had once again evaded discovery through sheer luck and the vastness of its habitat. I chose to believe the latter. I had to. Otherwise, everything, all of it, had been for nothing. But I acknowledge the possibility that I am wrong. That I have wasted my life protecting something that died decades ago, or never existed in the first place. That what I saw in 1962 was some elaborate misidentification, and everything that followed was confirmation bias and delusion reinforcing itself year after year. I don't believe that. The memory of that morning is too clear, too detailed, too vivid. I remember the eye. I remember the intelligence in it. I remember the recognition. That was not imagination. That was not wishful thinking. That was real. But I acknowledge that I could be wrong. That is the nature of faith, and this has been an act of faith, hasn't it? 62 years of faith in what I saw, in what I chose to protect, in the meaning and purpose of my sacrifice. If I am wrong, then I am a tragedy. An object lesson in the dangers of obsession, in the ways belief can destroy a life. My daughter is right to pity me. The researchers are right to dismiss me. I wasted everything on nothing. But if I am right, if the creature truly exists, truly survived into this new century, truly lives still in the cold dark water of the loch, then what I did mattered. The isolation mattered. The lies mattered. The sacrifice of my family mattered. It was terrible and costly, and I would not wish it on anyone, but it mattered. It meant something. I will never know which is true. That is the burden I carry to my grave. The ultimate uncertainty. Did my life have meaning, or was it a 62-year delusion? I tell you this not for sympathy, I deserve none, but as a warning. Be careful what you dedicate your life to. Be certain it is real and worthy and true. Because once you commit, once you make that first choice to put your purpose above everything else, you cannot go back. The path leads only forward, through sacrifice after sacrifice, until you look back and realize you have traveled so far from the person you were that you can no longer see them in the distance behind you. I lost my wife. I lost my daughter. I lost every friendship, every connection, every small joy that makes life worth living. I gained what? The knowledge that I kept a promise. The belief that I protected something precious. The faith that it mattered. Was it worth it? I don't know. Ask me in 6 weeks when I'm dead. Ask me in 60 years when the creature either emerges into undeniability or fades completely into myth. Ask me when all the variables are resolved and the equation finally balances or fails to balance. But I suspect even then, there will be no answer. Some questions don't have answers. Some sacrifices can never be justified or condemned. They simply are what they are, choices made, paths taken, lives lived in service of something that may or may not have been real. Fiona, if you somehow hear this, I am sorry. I am so sorry. I know that is inadequate. I know sorry doesn't give you back the father you deserved, doesn't undo the loneliness and confusion and hurt. But it is all I have to offer. I never told you the truth because I thought protecting you from it was more important than letting you understand. I see now that was wrong. You deserve to know why. You deserve to understand that it wasn't that I didn't love you, I loved you desperately, completely, with every part of myself that wasn't consumed by the promise I made. But that promise came first. It had to. And I will die not knowing if that was noble or monstrous or both. To everyone else who might hear this, to the researchers and the tourists and the skeptics and the believers, I leave you with this. The loch keeps its secrets. Some of those secrets are real and some are imagined and some are impossible to categorize as either. But they are all powerful. They all shape lives. They all demand choices. I chose to believe. I chose to protect what I believed in, regardless of the cost. I would not recommend that choice to anyone. But I cannot entirely regret it either. Because for 62 years, I knew, or believed I knew, which might be the same thing, that there was magic in the world. Real, ancient, impossible magic. And I kept it safe. If I was wrong, then I was a fool. If I was right, then the creature is still out there, somewhere in the deep, waiting for the world to forget about it enough that it can surface occasionally in the early morning mist, just to breathe and see the sky. I hope I was right. I hope it lives still. I hope it outlives all of us, all the researchers and the tourists and the skeptics, and survives into an age when humans have finally stopped looking, stopped wondering, stopped threatening its existence with our curiosity. And I hope, wherever it is, it remembers the promise I made. I hope it knows I kept it, faithfully, for 62 years. I hope that matters. This is Duncan MacLeod, recorded on March 17, 2025, in my cottage overlooking Loch Ness. I am 87 years old, and I am dying. This is my confession, my testimony, my final accounting. I have told you everything I can tell you. I have given you the truth as I understand it. What you do with it is beyond my control now. Whether you believe me or dismiss me, whether you think I protected something real or wasted my life on fantasy, I can no longer influence. My watch is ending. Someone else will have to keep it now, or no one will, and either way the outcome will be the same. The loch will remain deep and dark and cold. And whatever lies in it, or doesn't, will continue unchanged by human belief or disbelief. That is how it should be. That is how it must be. That is the only way the impossible can survive. Thank you for listening. I hope you found whatever you were looking for in my story. I hope you understand, even if you do not agree. I hope you remember. And I hope, God, I hope, that somewhere in the deep water, there is still something ancient and beautiful and real, still breathing, still surviving, still waiting for the world to leave it alone. Goodbye. Duncan MacLeod died on April 3, 2025, in his cottage overlooking Loch Ness. He was alone. His daughter, Fiona MacLeod Cameron, inherited the property and found this recording among his possessions. She has chosen to release it publicly, not as evidence of anything, but as a memorial to a complicated man who lived an extraordinary life in complete isolation. Whether his sacrifice was meaningful or meaningless, we cannot say. But it was real. That much, at least, is certain. If you've stayed with this story until the end, if Duncan's confession has touched you in any way, I ask you to honor his memory by sharing this video. Subscribe to this channel so that his testimony reaches those who need to hear it, whether they are believers searching for validation, skeptics searching for cautionary tales, or simply people trying to understand what drives someone to sacrifice everything for something they believe in. Duncan spent 62 years in silence. Now, in death, let his voice carry as far as it can. Let his story be heard. Let his choice, whatever you think of it, be remembered. That is the least we can do for a man who gave everything to keep a promise. Thank you for bearing witness to the last testimony of Duncan MacLeod, the fisherman who never spoke about what he saw in Loch Ness until it was too late for anything to change. May he finally find peace in whatever lies beyond the dark water.